The CFO's voice was thinner than I remembered. "We can't access anything," she said. "It's all locked." I stood in my kitchen with one hand on the counter and looked out at my backyard. The hydrangeas needed trimming. The bird feeder was crooked again. 3 days earlier, my brother-in-law had stood in my office, hands in his pockets, and told me security would walk me out. Now the company couldn't open its own systems. I took a breath. "Then why does it only open?" I said, "for me." She didn't answer right away. I could hear something in the background. A conference room door closing. Footsteps. Someone whispering. Then silence again. "Evelyn," she said, quieter now, "can you come in?" I leaned against the counter. No anger. No satisfaction. Just a kind of stillness I had not felt in years. "I'm not available today," I said. Another pause. "This is serious." "I know." Her breathing changed. Not panic. Recalculation. That was the moment I understood they had finally stopped treating me like a person they could move around. They had started treating me like a missing load-bearing wall. 3 days earlier, none of them had looked that worried. That morning had begun like any other Tuesday. I got up at 5:30. Made coffee. Fed the dog. Answered 2 emails before sunrise because the warehouse team in Ohio always sent theirs before 6. My husband Mark came downstairs tying his robe and asked if I was leaving early. "Board packet is due," I said. He nodded and opened the refrigerator. We had been married 14 years. Long enough for silence to mean comfort most days. Long enough for it to mean avoidance on others. His sister's husband, Greg, had been more involved lately. That was the family phrase. More involved. It sounded clean. Professional. It meant he had started showing up to meetings he did not understand and offering opinions no one had requested. Greg had secured new funding 2 weeks earlier. Not alone, of course. Nothing is ever alone. But he had put his face on it. Took the calls. Played golf with the right men. Used words like scale and leverage and exit strategy, as if the company had appeared out of the air waiting for his vocabulary to bless it. I had spent 12 years building that place. 12. Not as a founder with magazine covers and cocktail hour myths. As the one who made it hold. Operations, vendors, systems, hiring, client retention, margin cleanup, policy structures nobody noticed because they worked. I was the person people called when payroll glitched, when the Nashville office lost network access, when a client threatened to pull a contract when the warehouse scanner system froze on a Monday morning. I knew who had a sick mother, who needed more training, which manager inflated numbers, which vendor lied politely. I knew which copier jammed if you loaded it too full. That was my kind of authority. Not loud, not visible from the parking lot, but real. By 8:15 I was in my office on the 2nd floor. Glass wall. Corner view of the lot. Ficus tree I never wanted but had somehow kept alive. A framed photo of Mark and me from Maine. One of the whole family at Thanksgiving 2 years before things got tight around the edges. I sat down, opened my laptop, and noticed a calendar invite from Greg. 9 o'clock. No subject line beyond quick sync. I almost laughed. Greg never used words like quick unless he was rehearsing someone else's tone. At 8:58 I saw him through the glass. Navy suit. Notier. Phone in hand. 2 security contractors behind him. Not our usual building staff. Outside contractors. That was his first mistake. He knocked once and opened the door before I answered. "Morning," he said. I looked from him to the men behind him. Then back. Something wrong. He smiled. Not warmly. With the brittle confidence of a man who had practiced the sentence several times and hoped speed would make it feel legitimate. "You're done," he said. "Security will escort you out." There are moments when your body reacts before your mind does. Mine didn't. I stayed very still. Greg stepped farther into the room. Didn't sit. Didn't close the door. That was deliberate. He wanted witnesses without having to gather them. "I'm sorry it came to this," he added. He was not sorry. He was excited. There was a tiny shine at the corner of his mouth. The look some men get when they believe they are finally being taken seriously. I glanced past him. 2 analysts at the far desks had gone silent. One of them, Carla, lowered her eyes to her keyboard but did not type. I looked back at Greg. On whose authority? He lifted his chin slightly. The board approved a transition this morning. This morning, I repeated. He nodded. Effective immediately. I could have argued. Asked for documentation. Called legal. Called the board chair directly. But I already understood something he didn't. Transitions only work when the person leaving was merely occupying a chair. I was not occupying a chair. I was carrying a structure. So I closed my laptop. Unplugged the charger. Placed it in my bag. Then I removed my keys from the top drawer. Office. Archive room. Server closet. Legacy file cabinet. The old side entrance no one remembered still needed a physical key. I set the ring on the desk between us. The sound was small, sharp. Greg seemed almost disappointed. He had expected resistance. Resistance would have confirmed his importance. Instead, I stood, smoothed the front of my jacket, and wiped a faint fingerprint from the desk edge with my thumb. 12 years. That desk had seen me through 2 acquisitions, a recession scare Mark's bypass surgery, a ransomware attempt, and 1 employee death that left the office quiet for days. I looked around once. Not dramatically. Just to register the room as it was. Evelyn Gregg said we'll arrange for the rest of your personal effects to be shipped. I nodded. Of course. One of the contractors stepped aside to let me pass. He looked embarrassed. That nearly undid me more than Greg's sentence. Embarrassment means someone still knows right from wrong. I walked through the hallway with my bag on my shoulder. No box. No speech. No scene. A few people looked up, then down. One junior manager, Luis, half rose from his seat. I gave him the smallest shake of my head. He sat back down. The elevator ride was quiet except for the low hum of the fluorescent light above us. When the doors opened to the lobby, the receptionist stood too quickly. Evelyn. It's fine, I said. She pressed her lips together. Nothing was fine, but I was not going to make her say that in front of them. Outside, the air was colder than it should have been for April. I stood on the sidewalk for a second, bag in hand, while one of the security men held the door open behind me as though courtesy could soften removal. Then he let it close. That was that. I drove home without turning on the radio. At a stoplight, I noticed my hands were perfectly steady. That surprised me. At home, Mark was not there. He had a dental appointment in town. I set my bag on the kitchen chair and stood by the sink looking at nothing. Then my phone lit up. My sister Diane. Greg's wife. I let it ring. Then go still. Then ring again. I answered the 3rd time. Hi. Her voice was too bright. Evie. Greg said there was some kind of difficult transition this morning. I looked out at the yard again. Diane had always used the word difficult when she meant humiliating. That's one way to put it. He said the investors felt a leadership change was necessary. Leadership change. Another clean phrase. I leaned my hip against the counter. Did Greg also tell you he brought security? She exhaled. A small sound. He said he needed to keep things orderly. There it was. Family loyalty in business language. I closed my eyes for a second. Not from pain. From clarity. Diane, I said, did you call to ask how I am? Silence. Then I just don't want this to turn into something bigger. I almost smiled. Something bigger. As if being walked out of the company I built was still in an early manageable stage. As opposed to what I asked. She didn't answer. I heard a cabinet close on her end. Then she lowered her voice. Mark is going to be upset. Mark. Not me. Not the company. Not what Greg had done. Just the household weather that might follow. He should be, I said. When Mark got home, he came into the kitchen holding a paper bag of prescriptions and stopped when he saw my face. What happened? I told him. Not theatrically. Just the facts. Greg. Security. Bored. Keys on the desk. Walked out. He stood there with the pharmacy bag in one hand and stared at me like I had begun speaking another language halfway through. He had security escort you. Yes. Jesus. He sat down hard at the table. For a while, neither of us spoke. Then he said, I'll call Diane. Number? He looked up. No. Number. I poured myself water I did not want. If this is going to reveal anything I said, let it reveal itself. He rubbed his jaw. Mark hated conflict. Not because he was weak. Because he had been raised in a family where harmony was treated like a moral achievement, even when it was built on one person swallowing everything. That family had trained him well. I spent the rest of that day not calling anyone. That confused people. By evening, I had 6 missed calls. 2 texts from board members that said, "Let's talk soon." 1 vague message from legal. Nothing from Greg. At 7:40, I went into my study and opened an old backup interface on my home machine. Not hidden. Not secret. Documented, layered, approved years ago in case of executive death incapacity or credential failure. I entered my token. Then my passphrase. The screen opened cleanly. Permissions active. Core architecture intact. I sat back. And finally understood the scale of Greg's mistake. They had removed my body from the building. Not my authorization from the system. I closed the laptop and went downstairs. Mark was in the den pretending to watch cable news. I stood in the doorway and said, "They may have a problem by the end of the week." He muted the television. What kind of problem? I thought of Greg in my office. The little shine at the corner of his mouth. Then I thought of all the things he had never once asked how to do. The kind I said that starts when people mistake presence for control. 3 days later, the CFO called. And by the sound of her voice, the problem had already started. I didn't go in that day. Or the next. That mattered more than anything I could have said on the phone. Because urgency changes tone. And tone reveals truth. The first 24 hours after the call, no one else reached out. Not Greg. Not Diane. Not the board. Just the CFO. Twice. A short message. Then a longer one. Both carefully worded. No blame. No panic. Just pressure wrapped in professionalism. I didn't return either. Instead, I made coffee at the same time I always did. Fed the dog. Watered the plants. Routine holds you steady when everything else shifts. By mid-morning, I sat at my desk at home and opened the system again. Not to interfere. To observe. Permissions still active. Access layers intact. No emergency overrides triggered. That told me 2 things. First, they hadn't yet understood what they were dealing with. Second, they were trying to solve it the way Greg approached everything. From the surface. I clicked through the operational dashboards. Payment queues stalled. Vendor approvals pending. Inventory sync errors flagged but unresolved. Nothing catastrophic yet. But systems like that don't fail all at once. They slow. Then they stop. I leaned back in my chair. Not satisfied. Not angry. Just aware. For 12 years I had built redundancies. Fail-safes. Manual backdoors that required human judgment. Not because I didn't trust technology. Because I didn't trust people to know what to do when it stopped working. Greg had removed the person. Not the thinking behind the system. That was always going to surface. Around noon, Mark came into the room. "You've been quiet," he said. "I'm thinking." He stood in the doorway for a moment. Then stepped inside. Diane called again, he said. I nodded. I didn't answer. He exhaled slowly. "This is going to get complicated." "It already is," I replied. He leaned against the wall. "You're not going back in." "Not yet." That word sat between us. "Not yet." Mark understood it. He nodded once. "Just don't let this turn into something bigger than it needs to be." There it was again. That instinct. Containment. Control. I looked at him. "It already is bigger," I said. "Not because of what I do. Because of what they did." He didn't argue. He just stood there processing. That's how Mark handled conflict. Slowly. Carefully. Sometimes too late. By late afternoon, my phone rang again. The CFO. I let it ring twice, then answered. Evelyn. Her voice was tighter now, less composed. "Hi, Karen. We need to talk." "We are talking." A pause. Not irritation. Adjustment. "This isn't something we can handle remotely," she said. I didn't respond immediately. I let the silence sit, because silence forces clarity. Finally, she said, "We're having issues with system access." I gathered that. "It's more than access," she added. "Then what is it?" Another pause. Then she chose her words carefully. We can't process payments, she said. Vendor approvals are stalled. Inventory isn't syncing across locations. She stopped there, not listing everything. Just enough. Have you tried the override protocols, I asked? Yes. And they're not working. I nodded. Of course they weren't. They require multi-layer authorization, I said. We know that, she replied quickly. Too quickly. That told me they didn't fully understand it. Do you, I asked? Silence. Then more quietly, not completely. That was the first honest answer. I appreciated it. Who's in the room with you, I asked. Greg, 2 board members, IT. I almost smiled. That lineup explained everything. Greg leading, board watching, IT reacting. No one actually understanding the architecture. And I asked, and we need you to come in, she said. Direct now. No more soft phrasing. I leaned back in my chair, looked at the ceiling for a moment, then said why. She hesitated. Because you built it. Yes. And because we can't fix it without you. There it was. Clear. Unavoidable. I let that sit. Then asked, is Greg asking me to come in? Another pause. Longer this time. No, she said. He thinks IT can resolve it. I nodded. Of course he did. Greg believed problems could be managed by proximity to people who understood them. He didn't realize proximity isn't the same as comprehension. What do you think, I asked. She didn't hesitate this time. I think we're losing time, she said. And we don't have a clear path forward without you. Good. That was honest. I respected that. And what happens if I come in, I asked. We assess, she said. We stabilize. And after that, she didn't answer immediately. Because that's where things get complicated. Finally, she said we figure out next steps. Next steps. Undefined. Flexible. Non-committal. I closed my eyes for a second. Then opened them. Karen, I said, what exactly are you asking me to do? She exhaled slowly. I'm asking you to help us regain control of the systems. Control. That word again. Everyone wants control. Few understand what it requires. And what authority would I have, I asked. Silence. Then we can discuss that when you get here. Number. That wasn't going to work. Authority isn't something you discuss after, I said. It's something you define before. The room on her end went quiet. I could almost picture it. Greg shifting in his seat. Board members exchanging glances. IT staring at screens they didn't fully trust. Evelyn, she said more carefully, now we don't have time for a negotiation. I sat up straighter. You don't have time not to, I replied. That landed. I could hear it. The shift. Not resistance. Recognition. We need operations running, she said. And I need clarity, I answered. We stayed there for a moment. Balanced. Neither pushing, neither retreating. Then she said, what do you need? I looked at my hands, resting on the desk. Steady. I need to know this isn't temporary, I said. What does that mean? It means I don't walk back into a system I built only to be removed again once it's convenient. Silence. Then that's not the intention. I'm not asking about intention, I said. I'm asking about structure. That was harder for her. Structure requires commitment. Not just words. I can't answer that alone, she said. I know. Another pause. Then can you come in tomorrow, she asked. I considered it. Not emotionally. Logically. Timing matters. Too soon and you look reactive. Too late and you look obstructive. Tomorrow morning, I said. 10. Relief moved through her voice. Thank you. I'm not doing this as a favor, I added. I understand. Good. We ended the call. I set the phone down. Sat there for a moment. Then stood and walked to the kitchen. Mark looked up as I entered. They want you back, he said. Temporarily, I replied. He studied my face. And I'm going in tomorrow. He nodded. Be careful. I poured myself another glass of water. I'm not walking back into the same position, I said. Good. We stood there in silence. Then he said, Greg won't like this. I looked at him. This isn't about what Greg likes. That was the first time I had said it out loud. And it felt correct. That night, I didn't prepare a speech. I didn't rehearse anything. I reviewed the system architecture one more time. Not to control it. To remind myself what I had built. Because tomorrow they weren't just calling me back into a building. They were calling me back into a role they didn't fully understand. And for the first time, I wasn't going to make that easy for them. I arrived at 10 on the dot. Not early. Not late. Timing matters when people are waiting on you. The parking lot looked the same. Same rows. Same faded lines. Same gray sedan in the third space from the door that never seemed to move. I sat in my car for a moment before getting out. Not to gather courage. To settle. There's a difference. When you walk back into a place that removed you, you don't rush. You choose your pace. I stepped out, closed the door, and walked toward the entrance. No security this time. Just the receptionist behind the desk. She stood when she saw me. Evelyn. Her voice was careful. Relieved. I nodded. Morning? No one stopped me. No one escorted me. I walked to the elevator alone. Pressed the button. Waited. The same soft hum. The same mirrored walls. I caught my reflection briefly. Not to adjust anything. Just to register it. Then the doors opened. Second floor. When I stepped out, the hallway felt quieter. Not physically. Behaviorally. People were working, but more carefully. More aware. A few glanced up, then didn't look away. That was new. Luis stood near the printer. He gave me a small nod. I returned it. No words. Words weren't needed. The conference room door at the end of the hall was closed. I walked toward it. Didn't knock. Opened it. They were all there. Greg at the head of the table. Karen, the CFO, to his right. 2 board members across from them. Head of IT at the far end, laptop open screen filled with logs and error messages. They all looked up at the same time. That kind of synchronized movement tells you who they've been waiting for. Evelyn, Karen said. Thank you for coming. I nodded. Of course. Greg didn't stand. He leaned back in his chair. Trying to look composed? He wasn't. There was a tightness in his jaw that hadn't been there 3 days ago. We're in the middle of something, he said. I looked at him. Then at the screen. Then back. I can see that. I didn't sit. Not yet. Karen gestured to the empty chair near the center. Please. I took it. Set my bag down beside me. Hands on the table. Calm. Greg leaned forward slightly. We've had some system disruptions, he said. Disruptions. Clean word. Soft edges. What kind, I asked. Karen answered before he could. Payment processing is stalled, she said. Vendor approvals aren't moving. Inventory sync is inconsistent across 3 locations. I nodded. And override protocols. Not working, the IT head said. He didn't look at Greg when he spoke. He looked at me. That told me everything. Show me, I said. He turned the laptop slightly. I leaned in. Scanned quickly. Authentication failures. Permission loops. Fallback triggers blocked. All exactly where they would be. I sat back. Okay. Greg cleared his throat. So how do we fix it? I looked at him. Not confrontational. Just direct. Why do you think it's broken, I asked. He frowned. Because it's not functioning. That's not an answer. Karen stepped in. We believe it's tied to authorization layers, she said. Yes, I replied. And we don't have the necessary credentials, she added. I nodded. Correct. Greg shifted in his seat. So you'll restore access? Not a question. A statement. I didn't answer immediately. Instead, I asked, what changed 3 days ago? He looked at me. Annoyed now. You were removed, he said. Yes. And that's the change, he replied. I shook my head slightly. No, I said. The change is that you removed the only active authorization layer without replacing it. Silence. The IT head glanced at Karen. Karen didn't look at him. She was watching me. What does that mean in practical terms, she asked. It means the system is doing exactly what it was designed to do, I said. which is protect itself when required authorization is missing. Greg leaned forward. So override it. I met his eyes. It doesn't work like that. Everything has an override, he said. Not aggressive. Certain. That kind of certainty is dangerous. Not this, I replied. Why not? Because I built it that way. That landed. Harder than anything else I had said. Not loud. But precise. Karen exhaled slowly. So what are our options? She asked. Better question. Finally. I folded my hands on the table. Short term, I can reauthorize core systems, I said. And long term, we need to restructure access layers, I replied. Greg shook his head. This is ridiculous. I looked at him. Not reacting. Just observing. What part? I asked. That we're dependent on one person, he said. I nodded. Yes. That's bad design. No, I said. That's misunderstood design. Silence again. Then I added, it wasn't meant to depend on one person permanently. Then why does it? He asked. Because the transition wasn't completed. He stared at me. What transition? I held his gaze. The one you skipped. That hit. Not visibly. Internally. Karen leaned forward. What transition? She repeated. I turned to her. The gradual transfer of authorization layers, I said. It requires staged access training and validation. She nodded slowly. And that wasn't done. Number. Greg scoffed. We didn't need it. I didn't respond to that. Instead, I looked at Karen. And now I asked. She didn't hesitate. Now we do. Good. That was alignment. I reached for my bag. Took out my laptop. Placed it on the table. Didn't open it yet. Greg watched me. Closely. Are you going to fix it? He asked. I looked at him. I can stabilize it, I said. And then we decide what this structure looks like going forward. He leaned back. That's already been decided. I shook my head. Number. It hasn't. Karen didn't interrupt. The board members stayed silent. That silence was important. It meant they were listening. Not to him. To the situation. You don't get to rewrite the structure because of a temporary issue, Greg said. I met his eyes. This isn't temporary. He opened his mouth, then closed it. Because somewhere he understood. Not fully, but enough. I finally opened my laptop. Entered my credentials. The system responded immediately. Clean. Recognizing. Ready. I didn't touch anything else. Just let the screen sit there. Visible. Accessible. Controlled. Everyone in the room saw it. No one spoke. That was the moment. Not when I fixed anything. When they realized I could, and chose not to. Yet? Karen's voice broke the silence. What do you need? She asked. I closed the laptop. Slowly. Carefully. I need to understand the structure I'm walking back into, I said. Greg shifted again. Impatient. This isn't the time for that? I looked at him. This is exactly the time. Silence. Then Karen nodded. What are you asking for? She said. I didn't rush. Didn't push. Just answered. Clarity, I said. On authority role and continuity. Greg laughed lightly. Short. Dismissive. You're not in a position to make demands. I held his gaze. Steady. No, I said. I'm in a position to make decisions. That changed the room. Not dramatically. Subtly. But permanently. Karen looked at Greg, then back at me. And in that moment, I knew who understood what was happening, and who didn't. No one asked me to prove it. They didn't need to. The proof was already sitting on the table closed in front of me. My laptop. Not open. Not active. Just present. Karen looked at the board members, then back at me. Can you show us exactly where the failure is? She asked. Better. Specific. I nodded once. Opened the laptop again. Logged in. The system responded instantly. No delay. No resistance. I turned the screen so everyone could see. Start here, I said. The IT head leaned forward. Greg stayed back. Arms crossed. Watching, not learning. I clicked into the authorization layer. A clean interface. Simple. Deceptively simple. That's the master control, Karen asked. No, I said. This is the gate. And behind it, everything that actually matters. I clicked again. Permissions expanded. Nested. Layered. Each one tied to roles, timelines, and validation triggers. Why can't we access this, the IT head asked. You can, I said. He frowned. We tried. You tried to override it, I replied. That's different. He nodded slowly. Understanding starting to form. Walk me through it, Karen said. I did. Not quickly. Not defensively. Just clearly. This layer requires active authorization from the primary architect, I said. Which is you, Greg said. Not a question. Yes. Then we replace that, he replied. I looked at him. You don't replace it instantly. Why not? Because the system doesn't trust replacement without validation. He shook his head. That's bad design. I let that sit. Then said it's resilient design. Silence. I clicked into the payment queue. Dozens of pending approvals. Vendors waiting. Supplies stalled. Nothing moves without this layer, I said. Karen exhaled. So we're frozen. Yes. How long before it impacts operations, she asked. It already has. She nodded. Of course it had. They just hadn't felt it yet. That's how systems fail. Quietly. Then all at once. Greg leaned forward. So fix it. There it was again. That assumption. That proximity equals control. I didn't respond immediately. Instead, I asked, what do you think fixing it looks like? He frowned. Restoring access. And then, he hesitated, because he hadn't thought beyond that point. That's enough, he said. No, I replied. It isn't. Karen watched both of us. Carefully. What happens after access is restored, she asked. Without structure, I said. The same thing happens again. Silence. That landed. Not dramatically, but deeply. The IT head spoke. We need continuity, he said. I nodded. Yes. Greg shifted. We have continuity, he said. No, I replied. You have position. That difference mattered. Karen leaned forward. What does continuity require? She asked. Better question. Finally. Defined authority, I said. Clear access layers. Staged transitions. And respect for the system as it was built. That last part hung in the air. Not emotional. Not personal. Just true. Greg laughed again. Short. Sharp. You're making this bigger than it is. I looked at him. No, I said. I'm making it visible. That changed something. Not in him. In the room. The board members exchanged a glance. One of them spoke for the first time. Why wasn't this documented more clearly, he asked. I turned to him. It was. He frowned. Then why don't we know it? Because no one asked. That silence was different. Not defensive. Reflective. Karen nodded slowly. That's on us, she said. Yes. It was. I closed the system view. Let the screen go dark. Then looked at them. All of this worked because it was understood, I said. Not just built. Greg leaned back. Arms still crossed. So what now? I met his eyes. Now we decide what this becomes. He shook his head. This is a company, not a philosophy. I didn't react. Because that sentence told me exactly where he stood. And where he didn't. Karen spoke. What do you need to stabilize operations, she asked. Short term, I said. Yes. Active authorization restored. And long term? Restructured access layers. With oversight. She nodded. And your role? There it was. Finally. I didn't rush the answer. I'm not stepping back into the same position, I said. Greg smiled slightly. That's not your decision. I looked at him. It is. That silence again. But heavier now. More defined. The board member spoke again. What are you proposing? He asked. I folded my hands on the table. Advisory control over system architecture, I said. Defined authority on operational continuity. And Clear boundaries. Greg leaned forward. You're asking for control. No, I said. I'm defining responsibility. That difference mattered. Karen understood it. I could see it. Greg didn't. Not yet. And if we don't agree, he asked. I held his gaze. Then nothing changes. The room went still. Not tense. Just clear. Because now it wasn't about emotion. It was about consequence. Karen looked at the board. Then back at me. We need operations running, she said. Yes. And we need structure, she added. Yes. She nodded. Then said, we'll step out for a moment. Good. That was the right move. They stood. Left the room. Greg lingered. Just long enough. You're enjoying this, he said. I looked at him. Number. Then what is this? I considered the question. Then answered honestly. This is what happens when you remove something you don't understand. He stared at me. Not angry. Confused? That was new. You should have told me, he said. I shook my head. You should have asked. He didn't respond. Because that was the truth. And truth doesn't require agreement. He left the room. I sat there alone. Laptop closed. Hand steady. No rush. No urgency. Because for the first time, the pace wasn't set by them. It was set by me. And I wasn't going to move faster than understanding allowed. They were gone for 12 minutes. Long enough to argue. Not long enough to resolve anything fully. When they came back in, Karen entered first. That told me everything. She had taken control of the conversation. Greg followed. Quieter now. Not defeated. But recalibrating. The board members sat down without speaking. That silence wasn't passive. It was evaluative. Karen closed the door behind her, then took her seat. We need to move forward, she said. Not to me. To the room. Then she looked at me. We're aligned on stabilizing operations immediately. I nodded. Good. And we agree that structure needs to be addressed before anything else changes, she added. Better. Specific. Not vague. Greg shifted in his chair, but didn't interrupt. That was new. What does aligned mean in practical terms, I asked. Karen didn't hesitate. It means you restore authorization layers under a defined interim structure. And that structure, as I said. She glanced briefly at the board, then back at me. Temporary advisory authority over system operations, she said. Defined reporting line through finance. And timeline, I asked. 30 days, she replied, during which we formalize long-term roles. I considered that. Not emotionally. Structurally. Who holds final decision authority during those 30 days, I asked. Another glance at the board. Then, you do, she said. Greg exhaled sharply. Not loud, but noticeable. That was the shift. Not announced, but real. I nodded once. Okay. No smile. No satisfaction. Just acknowledgement. Greg leaned forward. This is temporary, he said. I looked at him. Yes. He held my gaze. We're not restructuring the entire company because of a system issue. I didn't respond immediately. Then said, this isn't a system issue. Silence. Then Karen spoke. It's an operational dependency issue, she said. Correct. Greg didn't like that. But he didn't argue. That mattered. Let's stabilize first, she added. Then we address the rest. Good. That was sequencing. Not reaction. I opened my laptop again. Logged in. The system came alive instantly. Familiar. Responsive. Controlled. I began reauthorizing core layers. Not everything. Just enough. Payment processing first. Vendors need confidence. Then inventory sync. Operations need rhythm. Then internal access layers. Teams need continuity. I worked quietly. No explanation unless asked. No performance. Just execution. After 10 minutes, the IT head spoke. Payment queue is moving, he said. Karen checked her screen. Yes. Small shift in the room. Not relief. Stabilization. Greg watched. Arms no longer crossed. Hands on the table. Leaning in. trying to understand. That was new, I continued. Layer by layer. Not rushing. Because speed without structure creates the same problem again. When I finished the initial pass, I closed the laptop. Core systems are stable, I said. For now. Karen nodded. What's the risk level? Low short term, I replied. High if structure doesn't change? She wrote something down. Greg looked at me. What does that mean in real terms? I met his eyes. It means this happens again, I said. Unless you understand why it happened. He didn't respond. Because now he knew he didn't. That was the first real shift in him. Not power. Awareness. The board member who had spoken earlier leaned forward. What's the long-term risk, he asked. I answered directly. Misalignment between authority and responsibility, I said. Which leads to system failure. He nodded slowly. And the solution? Clear structure, I replied. Defined roles. And respect for operational design. That last part again. Not emotional. Just necessary. Karen closed her notebook. We'll need to formalize this quickly, she said. Yes. And your involvement, she asked. I looked at her. I'm not returning to my previous role, I said. Greg shifted again, but stayed quiet. Good. That was progress. What role do you see for yourself, she asked. Advisory, I said. Architectural oversight, and operational authority where required. She nodded. And reporting structure? Direct, I said. Not filtered. That mattered. No middle layer. No distortion. Karen understood. Greg didn't like it, but he didn't interrupt. The board member spoke again. That creates tension at the top, he said. Yes, I replied. It does. And you're comfortable with that. I held his gaze. I'm comfortable with clarity. That answered the question. Better than yes or no? Karen looked at Greg, then back at me. We'll need to work through the details, she said. Yes. But for now we proceed under this structure. I nodded. Agreed. Greg finally spoke. We'll revisit this in 30 days. I looked at him. We'll evaluate it, I said. Not revisit. Evaluate. That difference mattered. He noticed. Didn't argue. That mattered more. The meeting ended without ceremony. No handshakes. No closing statements. Just movement. People standing, gathering papers, shifting back into their roles. Except the roles had changed. Subtly. But permanently. I packed my laptop. Stood. Didn't go back to my office. Not yet. Instead, I walked to the floor. Slowly. Not inspecting. Observing. People looked up. Some nodded. Some didn't. That was fine. Recognition doesn't need to be universal. It just needs to be real. Luis stopped me near the printer. Everything okay? He asked. I looked at him. For now, I said. He nodded. That was enough. I didn't stay long. I didn't need to. Because I wasn't rebuilding presence. I was redefining it. On my way out, I passed my old office. The door was open. Someone else's things on the desk. Different laptop. Different chair. I paused for a second, then kept walking. No attachment. No resentment. Just distance. Outside, the air felt different. Not lighter. Clearer. I stood on the steps for a moment, then walked to my car. When I got in, I didn't start the engine right away. I sat there, hands on the wheel, still, because something had shifted. Not in the company, not in the system, in me. I wasn't returning. I was redefining, and that difference was going to matter more than anything else. The next week was quieter than I expected. Not calm, just controlled. The kind of quiet that comes when people are adjusting to a structure they didn't plan for. I didn't go in every day. That was intentional. Presence creates expectation. Distance creates clarity. Instead, I worked from home 3 mornings that week. Logged into the system. Reviewed reports. Flagged inconsistencies. Left notes where needed. No long emails. No explanations. Just precise adjustments. Karen responded quickly. Efficient. Focused. She had shifted her posture. Not toward me. Toward the work. That mattered. Greg was different. He didn't call. Didn't email directly. But I could see his influence. Requests routed through others. Decisions delayed. Small attempts to reassert control without confronting the structure directly. That told me he was still trying to understand where he stood. And where I did. By Thursday, Karen asked me to come in again. Not urgent. Scheduled. 2 o'clock. I arrived at 2. Same parking spot. Same elevator. But the feeling had changed. Not tension. Not resistance. Something closer to awareness. People knew now. Not everything, but enough. When I entered the conference room, it was just Karen and Greg. No board. No IT. That was deliberate. This wasn't about systems. It was about structure. Karen gestured for me to sit. I did. Greg didn't speak immediately. He waited. That was new. Karen began. We've reviewed the initial framework, she said. I nodded. And we agree on the need for defined authority, she continued. Good. Progress. And the advisory structure, she added. Better. Greg shifted slightly. Not uncomfortable. Just present. We need to clarify boundaries, he said. There it was. Finally. Direct. I looked at him. What kind of boundaries? He held my gaze. Operational versus strategic, he said. That's a start, I replied. He leaned forward. You handle systems, he said. I handle growth. I didn't respond immediately. Because that division sounded clean. But it wasn't. Define growth, I said. He paused. Then said expansion, investment, scaling. I nodded. And system support, that I said. Yes. So where do they intersect? He hesitated. Because that's where things get complicated. Karen stepped in. That's what we need to define, she said. Correct. I folded my hands on the table. Systems aren't separate from growth, I said. They enable it. Greg nodded. I understand that. No, I said. You understand the idea of it. Silence. Not sharp. Just clear. He didn't argue. That mattered. Karen leaned forward. What does alignment look like, she asked. Better question.
Always.
Shared visibility, I said. Define decision points. And respect for constraints. Greg frowned slightly. What constraints? I looked at him. The ones you don't see until something breaks. That landed. Not fully, but enough. He leaned back, thinking. That was new. Not reacting. Processing. I don't want to be blocked, he said. I nodded. And I don't want to be bypassed. That was the balance. Simple. But not easy. Karen wrote something down. Then looked up. We need a structure where both of those are true, she said. Yes. Greg looked at me. Direct. What do you need to make that work? There it was. Finally. Not resistance. Not dismissal. A question. I didn't rush. Clarity on authority, I said. Defined escalation paths. And trust in the system design. He nodded slowly. I can work with that, he said. I studied his face. Not for agreement. For understanding. It was there. Not complete. But real. That was enough to move forward. Karen closed her notebook. Then we formalized this, she said. Yes. Greg added, and we review it in 30 days. I nodded. Evaluate it, I said. He didn't correct me. That mattered. We sat in silence for a moment. Not awkward. Just settled. Then Karen said, there's one more thing. I looked at her. Compensation, she said. Practical. Necessary. I'm not returning as an employee, I said. I know, she replied. Then structure it accordingly. She nodded. Greg didn't interrupt. Good. We worked through details. Not arguing. Not negotiating aggressively. Just defining. By the end, the outline was clear. Advisory role. Architectural authority. Defined boundaries. Review period. Clean. Simple. Functional. When the meeting ended, I stood. Packed my laptop. No rush. Greg stood too. Not automatically. Intentionally. Evelyn, he said. I looked at him. I handled this poorly, he said. There it was. Not an apology. Not fully. But acknowledgement. I nodded. Yes. He didn't flinch. I thought I understood the company, he added. I see now that I didn't. I held his gaze. That's a start, I said. He nodded. Not defensive. Not dismissive. Just accepting. Karen watched both of us. Quiet. Observing. That was her strength. Seeing the shift without forcing it. We left the room together. Not as allies. Not as opponents. Something in between. On the floor, people moved as they always did. Work continued. Systems held. That was the goal. Not control. Continuity. I didn't stop at my old office. Didn't look in. Didn't need to. Because where I stood now wasn't tied to a room. It was tied to structure. And that was something no one could remove without consequence. On my way out, Luis caught up to me. Things look better, he said. I nodded. They are. He smiled slightly. Good. That was enough. Outside, the air was warmer. Spring finally settling in. I walked to my car. Got in. Started the engine. But before I drove off, I sat there for a moment. Hands on the wheel. Still. Because something had settled. Not perfectly. Not permanently. But enough. And sometimes, enough is exactly what stability looks like. A month later, I stopped checking the system every morning. Not because it didn't matter. Because it no longer depended on me in the same way. That was the point. The dashboard still opened clean. Payment queues moved without delay. Inventory synced across locations without manual correction. The architecture held. But it no longer felt like something I was carrying. It felt like something I had set in place. There's a difference. Daniel called one evening while I was folding laundry. He doesn't call much during the week. That's always been his pattern. Hey, he said. Hey. You busy? Number. Pause. Greg asked about you today. I smiled slightly. Did he? He said things are smoother. That's good. Another pause. He also said he didn't realize how much you were holding together. I set the towel down. That happens. Daniel hesitated. I think he respects you now. I didn't answer. Not because I disagreed. Because respect that arrives late has a different weight. Do you care, he asked. I thought about it. Care is a complicated word. I care that the structure works, I said. And that people understand it. And him. I picked up another towel. Folded it slowly. He's learning, I said. That's enough. Daniel exhaled. Relief. Not because I had forgiven anything. Because I hadn't made it bigger. That's what people look for after conflict. Not resolution. Containment. I'm glad you're still involved, he said. I nodded. So am I. But not for the reasons he thought. Not for position. Not for recognition. For balance. That's what this had become. Balance. 2 days later, Karen emailed. Short. Direct. 30-day review scheduled. Same room. 2 p.m. I replied. Confirmed. When I arrived, the room felt different. Not tense. Not careful. Just functional. Greg was already there. Karen. One board member. No IT. No urgency. That told me everything. Systems were stable. This meeting wasn't about fixing. It was about deciding. We sat. No small talk. Karen began. Operations have stabilized, she said. I nodded. They have. Transition layers are holding, she added. Yes. Greg leaned forward. No major disruptions, he said. None. Silence. Then Karen said we need to define the long-term structure. There it was. Clear. Direct. I didn't speak immediately. Because this moment mattered. Not emotionally. Structurally. What are you proposing, I asked. She looked at Greg. Then back at me. Permanent advisory role, she said. Architectural oversight. Defined authority on system continuity. And reporting, I asked. Direct, she replied. Good. Greg added, operational decisions remain with leadership. I looked at him. That depends on the decision. He nodded. I understand that now. That mattered. Not agreement. Understanding. Karen continued. Compensation aligned with scope. Review annually? I nodded. Okay. No negotiation. No push. Because the structure already made sense. Greg watched me. You're not coming back full-time, he said. Not a question. Number. Why not? I met his eyes. Because I don't need to. That landed, not as resistance, as fact. He leaned back. Processing. That was his new pattern. Think first. React later. Good. Karen closed her notebook. Then we formalize this, she said. Yes. We sat in silence for a moment. Not awkward. Just complete. Greg spoke again. I misread the situation, he said. I looked at him. Yes. No softening. No edge. Just truth. He nodded. I thought control came from position, he added. It doesn't, I said. He held my gaze. I see that now. Good. That was the lesson. Not mine. His. Karen stood. Meeting over. Clean. Simple. No ceremony. No tension. Just decision. I packed my laptop. Stood. Didn't rush. Didn't linger. On my way out, Greg stopped me. Evelyn. I turned. Yes. He hesitated. Then said thank you. I studied his face. Not for sincerity. For understanding. It was there. Not perfect. But real. You're welcome, I said. And I meant it. Not because of him. Because of the structure. Outside the air was warm. Spring fully settled. I walked to my car, but didn't get in right away. I stood there, looking at the building. Not as something I had lost. Not as something I had reclaimed. Just something I had helped shape. And then stepped back from. That's the part most people don't understand. You don't always need to hold something to know its value. Sometimes, you need to let it stand without you. I got in the car, started the engine, drove home. The road was quiet. The kind of quiet that doesn't demand anything. At a red light, I caught my reflection in the mirror. Not to adjust. Just to see. Same face. Same lines. Same person. Different position. That's what had changed. Not who I was. Where I stood. And where I allowed myself to stand. When I got home, I didn't check my phone. Didn't open my laptop. I walked into the kitchen. Set my keys on the table. The same place. Consistent. Intentional. Then I turned off the light. Stood there in the dim for a moment. And thought about everything that had shifted. Not dramatically. Not loudly. But permanently. If you've ever been moved out of something you built, without warning, without recognition, pay attention to what remains. Not the title. Not the office. Not the access. The structure. The thinking. The part of you that made it work in the first place. Because that doesn't leave when you do. And when the noise settles, and people realize what they lost, you get to decide what you return to, and what you don't. If this story felt familiar, if you've ever been replaced before you were understood, take a moment, not to react, to observe, and ask yourself one question. Where does your value actually live? Because once you see that clearly, no one else gets to decide it for you.